Chapter 501. The entire room was dead silent. Wilbur slowly turned to look at Manfred, who was in shock. "Just show me everything you've got. I'll deal with it as it comes." Yet the truth was that the great elder of the Ray family had just referred to Wilbur as senior, and the special forces had retreated with just an order from Wilbur. Zane had even been asked to write a report on this. Wilbur was impossibly mysterious and unpredictable in terms of his power and identity, and Ray could hardly compare. It was only then that he finally began to realize just how terrifying this young man was. There had to be a reason Manfred's own father addressed this man senior. Manfred was the head of the Ray clan and knew it would be useless to struggle after such a thorough defeat as he bowed deeply to Wilbur. "The Ray clan officially surrenders. Please let us know what demands you may have, senior." "Demands?" Wilbur asked calmly. "What if I wanted the death of the entire Ray clan?" Manfred's face paled, as well as the rest of the clan members. Just then, Chester hurried to walk up and bow. "Senior, please forgive these insolent youngsters of my clan. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it up to you. Even swear my loyalty to you as your disciple for the rest of my life." The elders and other fighters present reeled in shock at the words. To be one's disciple was to pledge your life and name to them, and any form of betrayal would result in being ostracized from all of society and even death. Wilbur frowned at Chester. Chester hurried to say, "Senior, I'm not just doing this for my clan. I would like to be by your side and learn how to be a better cultivator, all while doing all I can for you." Chester was telling the truth here. He knew that Wilbur demanding the Ray clan's death was no empty threat. On top of that, Chester was undeniably deeply respectful of Wilbur's powers and actually wanted to learn from him. Everyone present who understood what it meant to be a disciple was in shock and disbelief. A sanctuary-level cultivator was willing to become Wilbur's disciple. That must mean that Wilbur's powers were in a whole other realm. Wasn't sanctuary level the pinnacle of a cultivator's skills already, though? How powerful was Wilbur then? No one dared to ponder on that for too long, gazing at Wilbur in terror. Wilbur was silent for a beat before saying, "I'll agree to that on account of your sincerity." "Thank you, Master," Chester said, overjoyed. Chester then turned to the crowd solemnly. "I, Chester Ray, hereby pledge my name and loyalty to my master for the rest of my life. I shall never betray him, or I shall suffer from all punishments that are sentenced upon me." The words left his lips, declaring Chester as Wilbur's disciple officially. Wilbur would also be Chester's master. Manfred closed his eyes, losing all hope in him. Magnus was trembling from head to toe, his eyes filled with terror as if the end of the world has come. His own elder had sworn himself as Wilbur's disciple. How was Magnus going to suffer for getting on Wilbur's bad side? Rhea was all the more terrified, fearing for her life. Who was this man that the Shandong siblings had gotten to help them? Chapter 502. The Ray clan had lost completely, and even the Special Forces officers were subject to this man's orders. Rhea finally understood that she was truly done for, and she had no leverage left against Sammy at all. It was only then that she began to regret her actions, feeling like what she had done was too much. No, she should not have treated Sammy like that, nor should she have taunted Wilbur at all. Yet now, it seemed like neither the Shandong siblings nor Wilbur were going to forgive her. Hopelessness, fear, and humiliation washed over her like a tidal wave as she sank back down onto her chair numbly. Just then, Wilbur said, "Now that you have become my disciple, Chester, I won't give you any more grief for your clan's actions." "Thank you, Master." Chester bowed deeply to Wilbur. Manfred's eyes flew open, and he stared at Wilbur in disbelief. He had thought that with how powerful Wilbur was, the Ray clan was going to be punished severely for sure, only for them to get out of trouble just like that. Manfred scrambled to his feet, bowing to Wilbur. "I thank you endlessly for your generosity and forgiveness, Senior. I vow to take this as a lesson and turn the entire Ray clan over a new leaf." "Yeah, you're fine now. Magnus and Rhea have to be punished though." Wilbur could forgive the Ray clan, but Magnus and Rhea would have to be punished for what they had done to the Shandong siblings. Chester piped up at once. "Don't worry about that, Senior, I'll strip Magnus of all his duties and positions at once and have him disowned from the Ray clan altogether. Rhea Quinn shall be completely blacklisted, and she will never appear on the screen ever again. The Shandong siblings could hardly contain their relief at the words, straightening up at once in validation. Magnus' face fell with distress and grief, and Rhea paled completely as all the light in her eyes dimmed. Wilbur let out a light scoff. All right. That'll do. They're still going to pay me back though. He turned to leave with the Shandong siblings in tow after that, Chester hurrying to follow them with a hasty smile. The four of them were gone from the hall in seconds, but it remained deathly silent. The live streams that were still going on, however, were positively abuzz with activity. Everyone was trying to figure out who the hell Wilbur actually was, where he had come from, and why no one had ever heard of him. Eventually, Manfred collected his thoughts to face everyone else and said, "You saw what happened today with your own eyes. Let's put an end to this, and you can report on it however you like. I'd just like to use the opportunity to declare that Magnus Ray is officially disowned by the Ray clan and exiled from Zealand. He is no longer one of us. Zealand Entertainment will also remove Rhea Quinn from the company and blacklist her completely. Thank you, everyone." Upon saying so, Manfred hurried to leave the scene with the rest of his family. The remaining businessmen present got the hint as well and left in a hurry. Only the reporters charged toward a shell-shocked Magnus and Rhea, practically shoving their microphones into their faces. Of course, neither of the two could even get a word out now, fleeing for their lives. By the time Wilbur had returned to his hotel, there was a notification saying that he had received $2 billion in his bank account. He glanced at it and let out a smile. "I hope that didn't hurt, Chester." "Of course not, Master. It's my honor to return to you what you're owed," said Chester respectfully. Wilbur chuckled, turning to look at the Shandong siblings. "I guess I'm done here then. I should head back now." "Please don't, sir." The Shandong siblings hurried to stop him. Chapter 503. "Is anything else the matter?" Wilbur asked. Dom exclaimed. "We haven't even thanked you for how much you've helped us, sir. You can't just leave in a hurry like that." "That's right. At least stay a few more days so we can repay you," Sammy said, her face turning red. Dom glanced at her, raising his eyebrows thoughtfully. Nonetheless, Wilbur shook his head. "I've got a huge mess to clean up in Town. I really can't stay. I know you'd like to thank me, but I have to go." Both siblings tried their best to convince Wilbur, but he insisted on leaving. At last, Dom could only offer to buy Wilbur and Chester flight tickets and send them to the airport. Before bidding them farewell, Dom said, "Sir, I haven't forgotten about the shares. I'll take the transfer documents to Town to you myself once I get them sorted. Don't you worry about that." "You really don't have to," said Wilbur. Yet both siblings were adamant about extending the gesture, and Wilbur could only relent in the end. Wilbur made a few calls to Town to sort out a few things and got on the plane back with Chester. Skylar was already waiting for them at the airport and drove them straight back to Sea Lake Island. Around a little over 9 o'clock that night, Wilbur and Chester headed over to one of the meeting rooms on the island. In the room were Gerard Torrent of the Torrent clan, Matt Lilith of the Lilith clan, Ian Owens of the Owens clan, as well as Gertrude Quick, the assassin. It was perfectly understandable that Gerard and Matt were there. They were the leaders of their respective clans after all. Wilbur was surprised that Ian, Jeremy Owens' nephew, had been chosen to represent the clan instead of Jeremy's son, John. Regardless, Ian had surrendered his loyalty alongside Gerard and Matt before, and Wilbur had left it at that. Wilbur gestured for everyone to sit down, taking a seat at the head of the table as he looked at everyone else. "This is Chester Ray of the Ray clan in Zealand. He's a beginner sanctuary-level cultivator. A very skilled man," Wilbur introduced. The rest of the room was shocked. A sanctuary-level cultivator was no ordinary presence, and everyone got up to bow to him, paying their respects. Chester hurried to return the gesture, and everyone finally sat down again after that. Wilbur was silent for a beat before saying, "I didn't want to do this at first, but I'm going to have to say some things now that you all have some form of relation to me." The rest of the room was silent, waiting for him to continue. With the objective of maintaining peace as well as a better future for Town, I'm going to give everyone here two options. 1. You can cut ties with me completely and expand on your own. You just have to respect the rules I've set within Seacher Town. No killing as you please, and no owning illegal businesses. 2. You can become my disciples. I'll be monitoring your actions and decisions, and you'll be working for me. But I'll also be in charge of your safety. If you agree, you may stay back and live here. If you go with the first option, you may leave now. I don't have anything to demand of anyone here, nor am I worried either of you might do anything to me. The rest of the room was quite surprised at the words. Chester was the first to speak, smiling as he said, "Well, I've already had the honor of pledging my loyalty as one of my master's disciples." Gertrude stood up without hesitation as well. Gertrude, quick, swear to be one of Master Wilbur Penn's disciples. I shall be loyal for the rest of my life and never betray him or be subject to any punishment sentenced upon me. Everyone there knew that Gertrude was in the middle of being hunted down by her previous assassin squad, and it was perfectly understandable that she would jump at the chance to become Wilbur's disciple. After Gertrude's declaration, Gerard and Matt followed without hesitation with their own declarations to become Wilbur's disciples. They had already been loyal before this, and now they would have official positions. Chapter 504. Schuyler laughed and got up to pledge his loyalty as well. He had been a lone ranger in the first place with nothing to lose and had complete respect for Wilbur ever since meeting him. Ian was the last to stand. He was not fit to be a cultivator and did not know why the Owens clan had picked a mortal like him to take on the role of clan leader. Ian bowed to Wilbur. "Master, the Owens clan has disrespected you greatly before, but you forgave us so generously and never punished the rest of the clan members. I'm not a cultivator, but I'm more than willing to become your disciple and pledge the loyalty of the Owens clan to you." Wilbur nodded, and Ian made his declarations as well. After he was done, Wilbur officially had 6 disciples: Matt, Gerard, Ian, Gertrude, Schuyler, and Chester. Their respective skills were on vastly differing levels, and there was even a mortal with no powers at all, but they were all definitely forces to be reckoned with. As for Farron, Elsa, and Faye, Wilbur was not going to get his friends or romantic partners to become his disciples. Ryder had a different identity altogether. Eileen was a guest at most as well, or an ally staying there temporarily who Wilbur was fighting alongside against the Church of Bloodism. Wilbur then said, "Well, since you've made your choice, I'll get straight to the point. You all know about the rules I've set. No illegal businesses and no rampant killings unless your safety is compromised." Wilbur had set those rules because many illegal corporations in the world eventually ended up committing mass killing sprees. The people in power fought among themselves all the time for money or pride, resulting in countless casualties in their wake. Wilbur had too much blood on his hands and too many encounters with life and death to know he never wanted to see another massacre, and thus established the rules. Everyone got up to bow, expressing their loyalty and that they would stand fiercely by these rules. Wilbur waved a hand. "That's all then. You can go back to whatever you were doing, and you're welcome here anytime." He then said to Chester, "Find yourself a place to live here. I'm sure you can sense how different this place is. Congratulations on making the right choice." He got up and left after that. Chester had already been stunned from the moment he had set foot on Sea Lake Island and sensed the dense spiritual air around him. This was practically a perfect place for cultivators to practice and sharpen their craft. It was definitely true that every choice you made in life was important. Following that, Wilbur's new disciples chatted among themselves, mostly about how much they respected him. Wilbur returned to his room, and Faye walked in at once. She huffed at the sight of him, complaining, "You've really been out and about these days, haven't you? I can't even remember when I last saw you." "Well, you're seeing me now, aren't you?" Wilbur flushed awkwardly. Faye sat down next to him, leaning her head onto his shoulder. "What about that dinner you were going to take me out to?" Just as Wilbur was about to respond, his phone rang. "Hello, Shelby. What's up?" "Wilbur, I think I've run into some trouble. Do you think you could make a trip to rural karaoke?" "I'll be right there. Wait for me." Wilbur hung up the call and looked guiltily at Faye. Chapter 505. Faye let out a long sigh. "What now?" "It's my friend Ethan Osborne. His sister seems to be in trouble. I need to check it out," Wilbur replied helplessly. Face cowled, slapping Wilbur on the arm. "You've got lots of options, haven't you? First that Sammy Shondone, and now some girl in college?" "What are you talking about?" Wilbur huffed in amusement. "She's a close friend's sister." "Well, what's up between you and Sammy then?" Faye stared Wilbur down. Wilbur scrambled to say, "Nothing. I swear on my life. Nothing at all." "You might not feel that way, but she might. That's a celebrity right there." Faye's stare was starting to send chills down Wilbur's back, and he hastily said, "I need to get to Shelby in case something happens to her." He got up in a hurry and fled from the room. Faye sighed, leaning back against the couch, saying nothing. As a woman, she could tell that Sammy did have feelings for Wilbur. Who knew what Wilbur had been up to during his time in Zealand? Faye had been highly upset for the past few days, but there was no one she could talk to. She now understood just how normal it was for women to fall for someone as brilliant as Wilbur. Faye herself had been one of them after all. She had tried to talk herself into not stressing over these things, as Wilbur and her were already official, but could not help the occasional moments of jealousy. Faye lay down on the sofa and ended up falling asleep. She had chosen Wilbur, and she was going to stick to her decision. It was not her fault he was so perfect. Wilbur drove all the way to rural karaoke on his own. He had texted Shelby before getting in the car, asking her what happened. A response was sent not long after. It turned out that Whitney Ballard had been invited to dinner, and so she brought Shelby and 3 other friends she shared a dorm with. After dinner, Whitney's friends had wanted to go to karaoke. Shelby did not want to go, but eventually relented under Whitney's wheedling. Over at the karaoke center, Whitney's friends had gotten a little tipsy and started being quite rude to Shelby. Shelby was thus about to leave, but Whitney started whining that Shelby was being mean by abandoning them. That was why Shelby had wanted Wilbur to come. Wilbur chuckled at the message and sped up. College students were still partially kids, and it was perfectly normal for them to want to have some fun. However, the real world was a lot more complicated, and college students who had yet to enter society were still considered rather innocent in comparison. Wilbur was honestly quite happy to know that Shelby had such a sense of wariness. He made it to Royal Karaoke not long after and walked right in. Royal Karaoke was one of Seatratown's most luxurious entertainment outlets. A night there usually cost between $20,000 to $30,000. Far from what regular people could usually afford. A beautiful server came up to Wilbur to serve him as soon as he walked into the lobby. Wilbur gave the server the room number, and she led him all the way to the door of the room before leaving. Wilbur knocked on the door, pushing it open to enter. Sitting in there were Shelby, Whitney, Yasmin, Celine, and 3 young men. One of the men was in the middle of a passionate solo ballad, and Wilbur's entrance made him stop. All 3 men looked at Wilbur, and the one who had been singing glared at him. "Who the hell are you? You're in the wrong room." "He's a friend of mine. I told him to come," Shelby said, inviting Wilbur over to sit down next to her. Chapter 506. The 3 men exchanged glances, and the man who had been singing put his microphone down. He then sat down and looked at Wilbur. "Shelby's friend, huh? What's your name?" "Wilbur Penn," Wilbur replied. Whitney frowned. "Why didn't you tell us he was coming, Shelby?" "Well, he's a friend of ours, isn't he? I didn't think I had to," Shelby justified. Whitney sighed, but said, "Let me introduce you to them." Wilbur nodded, and Whitney gestured at the man who had been singing. "This is Mr. Conrad Willis from Blossom Corp, with a worth of up to $100 million. We're good friends." "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Willis." Wilbur smiled as he greeted Conrad, who merely let out a chuckle. "This is Mr. Howie Chuston, executive manager of Woods Corporate. He has a yearly income of over $3 million. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Chuston." "Finally, this is Mr. Cameron Shank of Ultra Corp. His family owns a beverage factory, and they earn up to $60 million a year." "Nice to meet you too, Mr. Shank." Wilbur greeted the 3 men one by one. Whitney seemed to stick out her chin as he did so, as if she was proud of the fact that she had friends with great achievements. Just then, Conrad said with a smile, "And what do you do, Mr. Penn?" "Oh, not much. Right now, I just run errands for a company." It was true that Wilbur did not have an actual position, And he was not lying about running errands for Cape International. Conrad let out a chuckle, shaking his head as he pointed at the bottle of gin on the table before him. Do you know how much these bottles cost, Mr. Pan? I don't drink a lot of gin, so I wouldn't know. Wilbur shrugged. Conrad's grin grew. These here alone cost over 30,000. Tonight's expenses go above 50,000. Wow, that's cool. You're the man, Mr. Willis. Wilbur smiled. Conrad's smile dropped the very next second. So, what right do you have to be in here, sitting down with us? Shelby told me to come, said Wilbur. Conrad scoffed. Even so, you should have had the sense to know that you'd be interrupting us. Is that so? Wilbur replied. Shelby said, we'll be out of here if we're in your way then. Have fun, guys. She got up to leave with Wilbur. However, Howie interjected. Shelby, that's a little rude of you. What? No, it's not. Shelby protested. Cameron said, we spent all this money on you, but you just invited some random guy and now you're leaving too. Aren't you being a little rude? I wasn't trying to be rude. I'm sorry if it came off that way, Shelby replied helplessly. Whitney frowned. Yeah, it's honestly kind of shitty of you to do this, Shelby. Mr. Willis was kind enough to take us out for the night to have some fun. You'll make me look bad if you just left like that. It's getting late, Whitney. I just want to go home. You can stay if you want, Shelby retorted. Whitney glared at her. We wouldn't want to stay either if you just left like that. Con, don't be a wet blanket. Shelby pursed her lips in discomfort. She shared a dorm with these girls, and they were all rather good friends. It was just that these men had a little too much to drink and began speaking rather lewdly. They were even starting to grope around, resulting in Shelby's refusal to stay there any longer. Whitney's words were making it hard for Shelby to leave, and she did not know what to do. Just then, Conrad said coldly, Shelby, tell your friend to get the hell out of here and I'll let this slide. Otherwise, he's going to have to leave on a stretcher. What do you mean? Shelby asked, panicking at once. Despite her brother having told her that Wilbur was a very powerful person in Seachertown, Shelby did not know just how powerful he actually was. There were 3 men in the room, and they were all pretty drunk. Shelby was honestly pretty worried about getting Wilbur into trouble if a fight were to break out. Chapter 507. Conrad scoffed. Everyone in Seachertown knows better than to mess with me. You entered a private room and intruded on my night out, and now you're trying to leave with one of my friends. Who the hell do you think you are? Whitney said. Just tell him to leave, Shelby. Don't make this difficult for us. She had been friends with Conrad for about half a year now. He was a generous man, with friends who were just as wealthy as he was. Whitney had received quite a few gifts from Conrad, even in the form of cold, hard cash. She knew what Conrad was trying to do, and had thus kept him at arm's length while maintaining a close enough friendship with him. Whitney was certain that all she had to do was figure out what Conrad liked and kept him happy, and she would be set for the rest of her life. Thus, she did not want Wilbur to get on Conrad's bad side. A wealthy young man like this was not to be messed with. Whitney thought that it was not worth it for Wilbur to offend Conrad, and even felt like Shelby was kind of dumb. There was nothing wrong with hanging around rich people. Why did Wilbur have to be a wet blanket? What an idiot that man was, however. Shelby shook her head. No, I'll be leaving with Wilbur. Have fun, you guys. She turned to leave, with Wilbur following behind her. Cameron got up in a fit of fury as he shouted, I'll change my family name if you can get out of this room alive tonight, Penn. What are you doing? Shelby exclaimed. Howie sneered as well. You refuse to play nice, so we don't have to play nice either. You can leave, but this guy's staying. Wilbur smiled. Sure, you can head back first, Shelby. I'll handle it from here. You think you're a tough guy, huh? Can you stop making a fool out of yourself? Whitney glared at Wilbur exasperatedly. To her, Wilbur and Conrad were worlds apart. How on earth could Wilbur possibly handle this situation? Shelby frowned. No way. We're leaving together. Shelby, Conrad said, raising his voice. I've been nice enough already. And that's only because of Whitney. Yasmin and Celine hurried to get to their feet. Just drop it, Shelby. Please calm down, Mr. Willis. We'll just hang out another time. It was clear the party was over, and the 2 girls did not want to make a big deal out of this. Whitney sighed. What a buzzkill, Conrad said sharply. Whitney, take your friends home. I'm going to have a word with Mr. Penn here, Whitney said carefully. Okay. Goodbye then. Don't let it get out of hand. I'll call you soon. She got to her feet and shot a look at Wilbur. At least know what you're dealing with before you get yourself into trouble. Honestly, you could use a lesson. Wilbur did not know what to say in response. Whitney was nothing but a gold digger. For someone still in college, who knew how she was going to turn out after she left school? Just then, Shelby insisted on leaving with Wilbur refusing to go otherwise. Whitney shook her head. What the hell is wrong with you? Let's go already. Don't piss Mr. Willis off. You head back first. I'll be fine. Don't worry about me. Wilbur smiled at Shelby. Shelby shook her head firmly. There was no way in hell she was going to leave Wilbur alone in such a dangerous situation. Chapter 508. The look on Shelby's face made Conrad flare up in anger. Well, I tried to be nice here. Get him. Howie and Cameron each grabbed a bottle from the table, and the three men had Wilbur surrounded. Shelby panicked. What the hell are you doing? I'm calling the police. Whitney dragged Shelby away at once, muttering, Have you lost your mind? They're just scaring him. Come on. We should get back. Or do you want our school to find out and expel us? Shelby was then yanked out of the room by Whitney in a flurry. Wilbur looked at the three men around him, his expression darkening as he said, I wasn't going to make a big deal out of things because a friend's sister was here, but it looks like you're letting this get to your heads. What the fuck did you just say? I'll fucking kill you, Conrad yelled, swinging the bottle in his hand down on Wilbur. A loud thump could be heard. Wilbur had kicked Conrad into the corner of the room in just one move, leaving Howie and Cameron in shock. Neither of them had seen exactly what Wilbur had done, or how Conrad had flown so far away. Wilbur glanced at the two men, sitting down on the couch coldly. Bunch of idiots. Just then, Conrad struggled to get to his feet with a hand clutching his cheek as he spat viciously. You're in big trouble, you bastard. I wouldn't stay here any longer if I were you. Is that so? I'm staying right here then, Wilbur responded dismissively. These young men born with a silver spoon were all the same, especially when they were drunk. Conrad took his phone out, dialed a number, and shouted as soon as the call connected. Mr. Lane, I just got beaten up at your club. Are you coming to help me? I'll handle it myself if you aren't going to. He hung up the call after that, glowering at Wilbur. You're fucked, dude. I'll call you my daddy if you even manage to leave this room tonight. Wilbur let out a chuckle. No thanks, man. I don't want a son like you. Conrad almost exploded with rage at the words, pointing at Wilbur as he fumed. Just you wait till Mr. Lane gets here. Let's see how cocky you can get then. Who's this Mr. Lane guy? Is he a big deal? Wilbur smiled. Conrad spat. You don't know. Do you? Tim Lane owns this place. He's one of the big names in the underground scene, and I happen to be one of his most valuable guests. I can't wait to see what he's going to do to you. Big name? I've never heard of him before, though. Wilbur chuckled. Howie, who had finally returned to his senses, shouted, Of course someone like you wouldn't know who Mr. Lane is, you piece of shit. You're about to find out real soon, though. Wilbur shook his head. What kind of bullshit threat is that? Cameron spat. Just you wait. You son of a bitch. You're going to be sorry. Just then, the door of the room was pushed open and a man in a suit entered with two well-built men behind him. Conrad hurried over at once. Mr. Lane, this motherfucker beat me up. Are you going to do something about it? You know I'm a paying customer here, right? One of your biggest ones, I might add. Mr. Tim Lane was tall and muscular, with a hooked nose that made his gaze look especially sharp. The tattoos on his body reached all the way up to his neck, and it was clear he was far from friendly despite wearing a suit. He chuckled at Conrad's words. Relax, Mr. Willis. What's the rush? Anyone who disrespects you on my territory is disrespecting me. Let me handle this. Well, beat him up then. I'll pay for the damage. Conrad had never been humiliated like this before and wanted nothing more than to soothe his bruised ego. What's the deal here, young man? Tim demanded coldly as he stared intently at Wilbur. Chapter 509. And who the fuck are you? Wilbur asked. Tim raised an eyebrow but followed with a slight chuckle. The fucking nerve of this guy. Everyone knows who Tim Lane is. Tim Lane? I've never heard of you, Wilbur said coldly. Tim's expression darkened. I was going to let you to settle this amicably, but you're going to have to suffer for talking to me like that. He's too arrogant, Mr. Lane. Come on, teach him a lesson, Conrad shouted from the side. Tim was still a businessman and knew how to talk like one. Look, you're going to apologize to my guest. I'll break one of your legs after that, and we can call it even. Apologize? Wilbur's expression turned dark. These guys were feeling my friend up and not letting her leave. They even threatened Ned to hell and back before you guys got here. If you break their legs instead, I'll let this slide. You won't have to shut down your karaoke club either. Get to it, or I'll make sure you disappear off the face of Seacher Town. You motherfucker. I'm going to get you. Yeah, Mr. Lane. Let's get him. Cripple him. Get that bastard. Conrad and his friends could not take Wilbur's cockiness and were rearing to beat him up. However, Tim's expression grew solemn at the words. After all, he had been around long enough to know when something was off. Tim looked harder at Wilbur, sitting there without a care in the world. This man was talking a big talk, but he seemed to be in no hurry to get physical. Where are you from, young man? Can I have your name? I don't want to risk disturbing the peace here, said Tim carefully. Wilbur chuckled. And where the hell are you from? What right do you even have to ask for my name? Tim's expression darkened. Have you heard of the Owens clan? Does the name Lightning Hank ring a bell? You're from the Owens clan, Wilbur asked in a deep voice. Tim flushed. He did not deserve to call himself a member of the Owens clan. He was merely one of Lightning Hank's henchmen in the past. Back in the day when the Owens clan joined forces with the Lilith clan and the Torrent clan to have Lightning Hank run the illegal operations of Seacher Town. Tim had held a rather high position working under him. However, since Lightning Hank and Jeremy Owens' death, people like Tim have lost their main pillar of support. These people ended up claiming territories as their own, declaring themselves to be the top dog of the territory. There were dozens of top dogs like Tim who were still able to make their way around Seacher Town to an extent. Tim grew even more cautious upon hearing that Wilbur seemed to know the Owens clan. How do you know Lightning Hank and the Owens clan then? How do you know them? If Tim really was a member of the Owens clan, Wilbur was going to have a talk to Ian about this when he got back. Just then, Tim said, I was one of Lightning Hank's men. I'm willing to respect another brother from the underground circle. Oh, so you're not a member of the Owens clan? Wilbur asked. Tim said nothing, but his face flushed in silent recognition. Wilbur pretty much understood then that he was just using the Owens clan name. Well, I'll tell you who I am since you asked, Tim replied. I'm all ears. If this guy was someone big, he was willing to just let the situation blow over. Chapter 510. However, if Wilbur could not come up with anything of substance, Tim was going to teach him a good lesson. After all, Conrad and his friends have spent enough money in his club for them to be considered VIPs. Listen up then, said Wilbur calmly. I was the one who killed Lightning Hank with just one blow and ran all those swords through Jeremy. It's your honor to even be in my presence. Yeah, right. Who the hell do you think you're fooling? I can't take this anymore. Get him already, Mr. Lane. Conrad and his friends could not take how cocky Wilbur was being and shouted loudly at him. They would have beaten him up themselves if Wilbur was not such a great fighter. Just then, Tim's face turned ashen. Having been one of Lightning Hank's men, Tim knew exactly how he had died. He had vaguely heard about Jeremy's death as well, and it was pretty much what Wilbur had just described. It had been said that Lightning Hank had been killed by some guy with the last name of Penn using just one move. And even General Gordon Grayson had been there. Jeremy's death had apparently been even more gruesome, and a young man going by the surname Penn had been responsible for it as well. Could it really be this guy? If that was the case, all four of them were done for. It was important to note that compared to Jeremy, all of them were next to nothing. Wilbur chuckled at the sight of Tim going pale in the face. He took out his phone. Do you need me to call Ian Owens, the head of the Owens clan, so he can verify everything I just said? Tim had fallen to his knees in front of Wilbur with a thump, terrified for his life. Sir, I'm so sorry. I was foolish enough to not realize I was in the presence of such greatness. Please forgive me. It was no secret that Ian was the new leader of the Owens clan, and even Tim knew about it despite his low position in the underground circle. With how Wilbur had described killing Lightning Hank and Jeremy Owens, Tim was certain that this man was telling the truth. Tim was hardly anyone in the presence of someone so tremendously powerful. In fact, Wilbur could crush Tim with just one move, and he would have nothing to say about it. Pride and reputation were meaningless to him then, and he knew that the best he could do was beg for forgiveness. The gesture, however, had completely baffled Conrad and his friends. It was important to note that Tim was quite powerful around these parts, and he had somehow gotten his wits scared out of him by this random guy. What exactly was going on? "What are you doing, Mr. Lane?" Conrad asked, feeling lost and confused. Tim was practically deaf to any voices aside from Wilbur's, bowing over and over again while apologizing. Wilbur said, "Now let's talk about how these guests of yours were stopping my friend from leaving, and even threatening me. What should we do about that, That's all up to you, sir. We'll do as you say," said Tim at once. Wilbur smiled and nodded. "Cool. One broken leg for each of them and I'll let this slide." "Of course, sir." Tim got to his feet, making his way toward Conrad and the rest. The three young men panicked at the sight of Tim's murderous expression. "Mr. Lane, what are you doing? You're supposed to be on our side here. Come on. Hey, we're VIPs here. What are you trying to do?" Howie asked, his voice trembling in fear.